what you think about the day. We're going to go on now with Lea Löbel, who was the person beaming us around the planet, but she is more than just a personal beamer. She is Lea from the ILO, and she will introduce us into the Equal Pay International Coalition and will present you the founding members of this overarching coalition, as you could say. And it's not only the ILO, but also UN Women and the OECD. So, Lea, the floor is yours before we hop to another country again.
Thanks, Henrike, for the introduction. Well, let me start with that. Equal pay for work of equal value is a fundamental human right, and in that also enshrined in an international treaty, namely ILO Convention 100 of the year 1951. So we are not dealing with an issue that only concerns the modern world of work, but actually an issue that we have been dealing with for quite a long time and that has been recognized for quite a long time. And it has been recognized not just in developing countries, but actually also in the industrialized states. And this is why it is so important to have this global dialogue on it and to share best practices around the globe. And this is why 3 international organizations have started and now provide a platform for this kind of dialogue. And that is the Equal Pay International Coalition, which is headed by the ILO, the International Labour Organization, with its mandate for the world of work. And here we have Emanuela Pozzan representing the ILO. We have UN Women, the UN organization that is entrusted with gender equality issues and mainstreaming that across the UN and across the globe. And we have Sean Cartwright joining us from UN Women. And then we have the OECD, which is the international organization entrusted with a strong analytic focus on labor markets and their outcomes. And we have Monika Queisser as a representative. But of course, EPIC wouldn't be complete without the other actors involved. Member states, social partners, academia, civil society, and the private sector partners. And this is the room that we need to actually engage and find out what works and doesn't work, which practices can we perpetuate and which ones should we abandon because we realize that they don't work to foster equal pay. And with today's EPIC meeting that is co-organized with the Fair Pay Innovation Lab, we let, of course, EPIC members speak, but please be also active on the platform if you're not an EPIC member and join us in the dialogue either through the chat function or later in the networking event. And for a little bit of a start off, I have some quick questions prepared for the 3 international organizations that you have with me. And I think you can either turn now to speaker view or gallery view to see the speakers. And I would like to start with you, Emanuela. You're senior specialist for gender equality at the ILO. What does the ILO bring to the EPIC table, and what are you taking back from EPIC for your work?
Thank you, Lea. And so, you know, EPIC is something that is very dear to the heart of the International Labour Organization. And as you said, it came about because of the slow progress that countries were making in closing the gender pay gap. And so this is why the 3 organizations came together with their different mandates to really try to do something about equal pay for work of equal value. So what the ILO brings to the table is very much the international legal framework to address equal pay for work of equal value through its international labor standards, in particular, as you said, Convention 100 on equal remuneration, but also Convention 111 on non-discrimination in employment. It also brings a solid knowledge on the factors that cause the gender pay gap, measuring methodologies to better capture the gender pay gap, data collection, and awareness raising. And what we have learned, what we take as ILO from EPIC is very much a learning experience. It has been a learning journey where we have learned a lot about new frontiers of pay transparency policies, as well as the effectiveness of social dialogue and collective bargaining to reduce the gender pay gap. And we have learned a lot about new tools like the one that will be presented later on today, but also other tools that have been developed by governments that really wanted to provide a simple way for companies to move forward and address the gender pay gap.
Thank you, Emanuela. And Sean, you're sitting in New York today. Good morning. What is the role of UN Women vis-a-vis EPIC, and what are your inspirational takeaways from the EPIC platform?
Great, yeah, thank you so much, Leah. Great to see you all here today. As many of you may know by now, UN Women is the UN entity dedicated solely to the achievement of gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls in all their diversity. UN Women therefore provides EPIC and its members with critical feminist advocacy tools, visibility, awareness raising, and knowledge sharing, and plays a key convening role between global feminist movements, EPIC members, and the broader intergovernmental arena. UN Women also plays a role in amplifying the work of EPIC and its members in closing the gender pay gap at intergovernmental fora, such as the Yearly Commission on the Status of Women, or CSW, the General Assembly, and most recently at the Generation Equality Forum, which is an intergenerational, intersectional, and multi-stakeholder initiative co-convened by UN Women, the governments in Mexico and France, civil society, and youth activists that I will discuss in further detail shortly. I would reiterate what Emanuela referred to previously about EPIC's influence on our own standards and practices. I think UN Women also, in terms of our partnership in EPIC, we've learned a lot about the importance of contextualization of the pay gap and how we can use unique tools to acknowledge the pay gap in specific contexts. So yeah, it's great to be here and looking forward to a great session.
Thank you, Sean. And Monika, you're head of the Social Policy Division at the OECD. How does equal pay fit into the wider range of topics that you actually discuss in your policy unit? And how has the EPIC dialogue fed back into your organization?
Thank you so much, Leah. Let me start by saying a huge big thank you first to the ILO, but then also to UN Women for having this idea. I wish I could say EPIC was the OECD's idea, but actually it was on the sidelines of CSW in New York when a colleague of Emanuela Tomei, who many of you may know, we had a meeting and she said, we have this idea together with UN Women, don't you want to join us? It's a fantastic idea, really great idea. And for us at the OECD, it is so important to be part of this because it is such an action-oriented coalition and it brings the willing together. As you may know, the OECD is an international governmental organization. So we have the governments sitting around the table who are all more or less aware. Some governments, I have to say, are more aware and more think about this problem than others. But through EPIC, we also have access to what Sean was just describing, the advocacy part, which we at the OECD have less of a role to play with the feminist organizations to bring all of those partners together. And with the ILO, of course, we have a long-standing relationship because we can we can benefit fully from the social partners that are institutionalized members. The tripartite arrangements in the ILO are just so important for this, as we can see, because we need everybody to join together. So that's the really important contribution for us. What can we bring to this? I think we can bring a lot of analytics. As you said, it's now more than 10 years that we have the gender recommendation that all of our member countries and many non-members also signed on. And maybe we can also bring something that's new in a sense that the OECD, as you may know, replicates almost governments. We have all of those different areas. We have education, we have environment, we have public governance, we have the economics, we have taxes. And at the OECD, we're increasingly mainstreaming the gender perspective into the work everybody in the OECD does. And we're getting, our member countries are pushing really hard for that. And that means that to EPIC, we can bring components that are not necessarily immediately something people think about when they talk labor market. We can bring the digitalization, we can bring what taxation does, the tax incentives for women to take up full-time or part-time work. For example, those are just two examples, but even trade, women in trade, very important when we take the global view. So I think that's something that maybe we can bring to that discussion. And anyway, just so let me say a big official thank you to our partners, ILO and UN Women, and then all the other willing organizations that have joined EPIC so far. I think it's a fantastic thing. And I have to say, since we first spoke about this a few years ago, we have come a very far way. Thanks to everybody who's so engaged in it.
Thanks, Monika. Emanuela is already sharing ILO studies here, but Emanuela, you have been recently interested with looking at employment developments during COVID. And my question to you, how has it affected women? Maybe you can give us one takeaway from that study.
Yeah, well, I think we all know that women have been heavily impacted by COVID-19, both in terms of job losses, reduction of working hours, but also in terms of an overwhelming increase in unpaid care work. If we look at numbers, between 2019 and 2020, women's employment declined by 4.2% compared to 3% per man. We're talking of millions of jobs. And while men are projected to recuperate their jobs, this is not going to happen for women, not at the same level as before the pandemic. And so we expect 13 million fewer women in employment this year compared to before the pandemic. There's also something to take into consideration that many of the jobs that women were holding before the pandemic might also not be there anymore, because COVID has accelerated changes in production patterns, and there is a need to reskill a lot of workers, in particular women in low skills jobs. So this is the situation which is not very rosy for women in employment.
Thank you, Emanuela. Well, Sean, UN Women just had its Generation Equality Forum in Paris this month. What is the one major takeaway there?
Yeah, so in the wake of immensely sluggish progress and unprecedented reversals on gender equality, as Emanuela just mentioned, in the outbreak of COVID-19, the Generation Equality Forum was founded as a form of reinvigorated multilateralism, defined by multi-stakeholder engagement in a similar way to EPIC, and intergenerational, intersectional advocacy and commitment building. The forum brings together representatives from governments, civil society and youth organizations, the UN system, the private sector and philanthropic organizations to essentially accelerate progress for gender equality and women's rights over the next 5 years, in support of the full implementation of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, as well as the achievement of SDG 5 on gender equality, and to essentially rebuild better and more equal after COVID-19. 2 global fora were held in Mexico City and Paris with the participation of over 104,000 people. The forum launched 6 action coalitions and a compact on women, peace and security and humanitarian action. The action coalitions mobilized over $40 billion in financial commitments and over 1,000 commitments in total, including policy, programmatic and advocacy commitments from all stakeholders. The 6 action coalitions identified a number of critical actions to accelerate progress for women and girls over the next 5 years, including gender-based violence, economic justice and rights, which includes closing the gender pay gap to ensure women's access to decent work, bodily autonomy and sexual and reproductive health and rights, feminist action for climate justice, technology and innovation for gender equality, and feminist movements and leadership. These actions have been detailed in the Global Acceleration Plan for Gender Equality, which was launched earlier this month in Paris and represents the forum's 5-year roadmap. I'll paste the link to the acceleration plan in the chat, and I implore all of today's participants to explore its various policy, financial, and advocacy commitments in your free time, particularly under the Action Coalition of Economic Justice and Rights, as these are of utmost relevance to equal pay in our discussions today.
Thanks, Sean. And a last question to Monika also, because also the OECD has had a close look on what COVID does in the world of work, and particularly for women. Maybe you can give us some insights from your latest endeavors and how this should actually feed into EPIC.
Yeah, this is a very interesting question that we've been looking at in great detail, monitoring. And initially, I think we have to be a little bit careful that we don't kind of generalize for all countries that women have been hit harder. When we look at the employment rates, it really depends on what indicators you look at. If you look at employment rates and unemployment rates, you have to admit that in many countries, actually, men were hit even harder than women. And of course, we still have job retention schemes active in very many countries, where you don't see this yet because you don't know exactly how the job retention schemes are going to be phased out. And as Emanuela was saying, we know that there's a danger that once these things are not in place anymore, then the whole workforce gets shaken up, and then particularly with the thrust of digitalization, we might see a completely new situation again. But I think one thing that we do know, and this has also been raised by our Icelandic colleague before, what really is important is to take a look at mothers or let's say households with children, because the withdrawal from the labor market among people with childcare responsibilities is really something that should worry us. And that doesn't necessarily show up in the numbers if we look just at employment rates. But again, I think we have to be a little bit careful, because I think we're talking about epic and equal means between men and women. And so we should not fall into the trap of having a narrative which says, oh, and again, women, everything's terrible and we're going back to the 50s and so on, because I don't think that this is particularly helpful, because there's areas where men have been also very hard hit. And what we're seeking to do is to create a gender balance between women and men, and not necessarily generalize here. I think more than ever before, and that's why EPIC is so important, we really need to take a close look at what is going on exactly in which country, in which sector, among which groups of people, and then help them with very targeted interventions. I'll just give you one example, since you're in Germany. Germany, as we know, has a huge imbalance in unpaid work, one of the bad countries in the OECD. But the extra unpaid work, according to a recent survey of the socioeconomic panel, was actually fairly equally shared between men and women. This shows you that you can't just globally say, oh, this extra burden is all borne by women. Yes, maybe that helped to distribute this equally, but now we have to attack the stock. I mean, we have to go to the crux and the origins of the problem, but we have to be careful to exactly identify what we're talking about, what are the reasons for it, and find the right policy tools to address those. And final remark on that, when it comes to the equal pay tool, we're just finalizing a great new study with data for Germany on the equal pay gap, and to understand better what's going on within companies and within sectors. And I'm delighted that the Family Ministry who's been commissioning this work is here today in this meeting. And we look forward to sharing all of that with you, because I think that will give us more insights. We're also doing that for Estonia, and we hope that more countries will come to the fore to ask us to do the same type of work for them at the OECD, which will then enable us to just understand better and find the proper policy tools.
Thank you, Monika. Yeah, thanks for this global insights of what's happening in the IO world. We are now turning back to our panels and to Henrike, and I really hope that you stay for our networking later on, because this is where you can ask all the tiny questions that have already been popping up on the side